Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. The Swim Brief is brought to you by Jersey Wahoo's Swim Club, a USA Swimming silver medal club in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. We had some tryouts last night, and that's actually very relevant to the conversation we're going to have later because this is an Olympic year, and you're probably wondering, once you read the title of this podcast, why we're having this conversation just a few days before the Olympics. But actually, what we're about to talk about is, in my opinion, to the people that listen to this podcast, probably way more relevant than who's going to win the 100 free at the Olympics. If you make your living off swimming, the conversation we're about to have is really, really important. I'm joined, I got two guests here, and one of them is Julie Bachman. Julie is the executive director of Gulf Swimming, LSC. And John Bradley, who now as I go to introduce him, I forget what John's official new title is. So John, will you tell us what it is you do?
I am the aquatic director for the Minnetonka School District, which is a school district in suburban Minneapolis, St. Paul.
All right. And you've served on the USA Swimming Board. We're going to get into your bios a little bit here, just so people know, who it is participating in this conversation. Hopefully, if you listen to this podcast, you have a sense of who I am. Let's start with Julie first, because I think, Julie, you got a little bit of an interesting history in terms of how you got involved in the sport of swimming. So bring people back to maybe a little bit of background of your professional career and then your entry into working in swimming.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of a long sordid tale, but I'll try to make it short and sweet. But this is when I realized how old I am. When I went to Bucknell University, so I was out east, and I ended up, my first job was kind of amazing. I got to work for the Baltimore Orioles for a couple of years. So
wow.
I had my dream job, and it's kind of been downhill since then. But I got into sales. I worked for a Fortune 500 company called Conagra Foods for about 15 years, directly in sales, but then also as a sales manager. And my daughter was born, and from there, I kind of retired from being on the road. I opened up my own restaurant. I was in the restaurant and bar business for a while. And my athletic background is actually in basketball, and I was waiting for this little child to grow up into this basketball player, and lo and behold, she fell in love with swimming. And we were living in rural Iowa at the time, and what I learned very quickly was that there really was no, we were on the rec center team.
Yep.
And there was I didn't even know what USA Swimming was, other than I'd see the logo at Olympics. And I started looking into that a little bit and realized that we were very underserved in that part of Iowa. And I started my own swim team. And a lot of those rec kids, we had about 40 to 60 kids. I know that sounds crazy. It's such a small team. But we had, this adorable, 8 and under group, and, a few older kids. And for about 3 years, I coached that team and ran my restaurant. We got to know some other rec teams in the area, and I kind of ended up in, for lack of a better word, but kind of handing off to some of those that had a little bit more time to actually coach. So my USA Swimming experience started by literally getting online, trying to figure out how to start a team, and kind of moving from there. But during that process, and this is pertinent to the conversation today, I learned a lot about customer service within USA Swimming and the business side of the sport, which is really where my mind usually is, just from my background, is, trying to understand, why are things done this way? I don't understand why this, I don't understand that. So the long and the short of it is I continued to ask so many questions that I ended up in this job. For lack of this job open, and I'm like, I'm gonna apply, and I got it. And it's I'm very fortunate. I work with a great group of coaches, and I now live in Texas, so I don't have to deal with the Midwest winter anymore. But that's kind of the long and the short of it. I'm essentially a swim mom that turned into a coach, and eventually became, a leader of an LSC. So that's kind of probably was kind of too long
Yeah,
explanation.
no, that's perfect. I mean, and sorry, you got to correct me if my statistics are not up to date, but golf swimming, is it still the biggest LSC number-wise, like number of members?
No,
in,
in Texas, but
Oh,
in
okay,
Texas, there's 5 LSCs. If Texas were an LSC, we would be the biggest LSC. Just
for
like
sure.
although if California was its own LSC, they would be the biggest.
One of
I
your
think
predecessors always bragged to me that golf swimming had the most members of any
Oh yeah,
LSC.
well,
Was that
yeah,
fake? Is that's
yeah, that's
inaccurate?
fake. That's hardly something to brag about. Yeah,
Okay.
I currently in a pre-pandemic, we were up to about 11,000 athletes.
Okay.
I mean, I honestly haven't really looked at. I mean, I don't think we're top 5. We're,
Okay.
you know, Indiana's bigger, Illinois is bigger. I don't know, JB, is Potomac Valley swimming? I mean, we're definitely one of the larger LSCs, but we're not. No, we're not.
Okay.
We're not it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
No, I think we're the best.
Bragging points.
Yeah,
bragging points
another
completely
conversation.
lost, Julie.
Right. Exactly.
And John, you're gonna have to give us select highlights, because I know you've been a lot of places, you've done a lot of things. But you know, as we get to maybe this is a good way of asking it. You've been a coach. You've served in administrative roles. You're doing some administration right now. Give sort of a broad overview of your path through swimming, which I guess probably is a little bit more of a traditional path than Julie's.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's more traditional. I have kind of a weird skill set because of all the things I've done. I started off in the 90s as an age group coach. My first coaching job was as a high school coach. I coached in Wisconsin in high school for about 5 years. Went through the age group thing with a couple of different teams. In the early 2000s, I transitioned from being an age group coach to a senior coach. I coached at the Rochester Swim Club for about 10 or 11 years as their senior coach, doing some age group stuff as well, but mostly seniors. And then about 3 years ago, shifted into a role with Minnesota Swimming, where I was their sport development coordinator. Then COVID happened. Things have changed quite a bit in terms of, I think, maybe the priorities of the LSCs. And I was approached about my current position, which is the aquatic director of this school district. And it seemed like the right jump to make at the time for me. It's very, very positive. The people are very, very nice. And I feel like I'm having an impact on things, which is good. But my job responsibilities now, I do have some coaching responsibilities. I'll be coaching their high school team on the girls' side, as well as running all the lifeguards and coordinating the master's program, coordinating the swim team, the club team, coordinating our lesson program, and doing all of those things to try to make the district better. It's a really unique situation here in Minnetonka where it's called Minnetonka Aquatics, and I'm actually an employee of the school district, as are all of the swim club coaches, as is our recreational swim coordinator, our lifeguard coordinator. We're all employed by the district, and I don't think there's anybody else in Minnesota that's quite like that. So it's an interesting model, but that's what I've been up to.
And people who listen to the podcast and read my blog will know we've had some interactions in the past, very much, especially in the wake of Ariana Kucher's publishing her allegations against Sean Hutchison that ultimately resulted in him being banned. At that time, I published an open letter to USA Swimming, and I'm already forgetting my chronology, but were you serving on the USA Swimming board at that time? Because I remember you responded.
Yeah, I was on the board at that time, and and I thought we had a great discussion. You and I got together, we potted a little bit.
Yep.
I think the bulk of my recommendations were to people: get involved. Get involved in your LSC, get involved in a regional space or a national space. And I think more than ever, that's still pretty good advice.
Okay.
If you don't like what's going on, get involved, and see if you can change it from the inside, or, if you don't want to get involved from the inside, you can try to change it from the outside and make a lot of noise, but get involved. That's
Well,
the best thing you can do.
I want to say, to follow up on that, John, I am doing my version of getting involved in that I'm actually finally a real live USA Swimming coach, which is, I told Julie on the phone, a lot of people who have been following what I've been writing about USA Swimming for a long time may have thought that, I was a really active USA Swimming coach all that time. I was a swim coach. I was coaching in America, not for all of that time. But as a college swim coach, I don't, you're in a weird zone, I would say, in that you are a USA Swimming member, but your experience isn't really representative of the overwhelming majority of USA Swimming members in terms of how you might interact with the organization, interact with meets and all that stuff. It's sort of more of I have this registration so I can show up to a summer championship meet with some of my college kids and get them to race. I wasn't running a club. I wasn't sort of interacting with stuff at the LSC. So I'm actually still, finishing my first year in getting to know some of that stuff here in the Middle Atlantic LSC. So that's my version of it. So the reason I brought you guys on is Julie reached out to me, and one of the things we talked about was a proposal that both of you, among others, put together around a swim league. And I don't want to step on it too much. Maybe, again, I'll go back to Julie. Just give an introduction to, I guess if we're talking about this from like a design perspective, what was the problem? There's a lot of problems, right? Anybody that's working in swimming can come up with a list of, at least 100 complaints, maybe 1,000, right? But what was the complaint? What was sort of the chief complaint that you were trying to address with this proposal? And then we'll sort of get into what the proposal was.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to start it, like that. So really, this whole thing starts way back, even pre-pandemic, with JB and I talking about when he was with the Minnesota LSC.
Yep.
And talking about the functionality of swimming in general, and beginning to look at swimming and using words like, what kind of products do we offer? What kind of services do we offer from a business standpoint? And those are words that I was always curious, and JB was kind of one of my initial go-tos. Like, I don't understand why, things are this way or that way. And it would turn into this great discussion that would often lead to, we were both in a position to be able to act on a lot of this stuff. And then when we got into the pandemic, we really started acting on a lot of things creatively. But anyway, what I think, there's a few things specifically. One is, we're in a sport that, this is not a sport that is necessarily easy to participate in. And when I mean that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of hours that are dedicated, right, in the pool. We also rely heavily on our parents to be able to run competitions. So we need volunteers. And I think we tend to complicate how we run our competitions. And this is just, again, I am in a lot of ways an outsider, and I probably will be for a long time, just because I bring, I wasn't a part of this. So right. I think I ask questions that people don't normally ask. I'll ask somebody that question and they'll say, what do you mean? That's just how we do it.
Right. Why is the swim meet so long?
Yeah. And even when I was a parent running rec center, summer leagues,
yep,
there were certain aspects like the high tech. It's like, what? Like,
right. Why is this software
so
bad? Are
you kidding
Why
me?
do you have to do so many mouse clicks? Why?
Yeah. And you had to literally, there was like one person that knew how to do this.
Right.
And if they weren't available, the whole meet wasn't going to happen, And so I never really could wrap my mind around all this. And so JB and I started talking quite a while ago, in the middle of the pandemic, about other creative ways to run competitions that are focused on fun and team, and are shorter to run. They're not, week long, 4-hour sessions. And a lot of this is primarily focused on 12 and under, 14 and under, because where do we lose kids? We start to lose kids at a certain, that's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
But onboarding families into the sport, I don't think we really ever talk about that in a sustainable way. Like kids join, and then all of a sudden parents are figuring out, hey, we got to do this. And then the next thing you know, the parents are like, oh, like in Texas, we got to get my kids' tags cut.
Right.
And we got to go to this meet. And we,
Yeah.
and it just gets crazy.
Yeah.
And I just have thought, and, I don't want to speak for JB, but I think he tends to agree with this, because he and I think alike, unfortunately, on a lot of things for his sake, is that if we don't start refocusing the definition of success, especially at the younger level, we're gonna continue to have problems. And I think we don't grow. Our sport doesn't really grow. We just need to look at things differently. So I know I'm skirting the point, and JB,
but this is all good background, though.
Yeah. But so he and I had these conversations, and then ultimately, and the reason he wasn't a part of this next part of this is because he was in the middle of transitioning to his new job, and I was just kind of like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I ended up having a really good conversation with Joel Shinnefield about this. And he's like, and he's like, exactly, this is what we need to be doing. I talk about this with my staff, and, we just haven't really tackled this because, we're in the middle of the pandemic. So yeah. Joel and Brendan Hansen and Juan Caraveo and I had a talk. We went over various different points, but, focused on, here's the problem, what's the solution? And the solution really, we didn't completely build it out, but the idea of the solution was we were going to call it the league, at least essentially, right? Just as a proposal, the league. It's for 12 and under. It's team focused competition. So, team A against team B. It's a sanctioned swim meet. You could have more than one team, but the idea is scoring points for your team. We didn't really totally dive into the scoring system yet, but the theory of it was easier swim meets. The next step was to hand it off not for approval, but for comments and suggestions to the officials committee, National Officials Committee, and the National Rules and Regulations Committee. How can we build this out?
How can we make this a reality?
We everybody's a stakeholder in this. How can we make this work? And what came back was absolutely shocking to me. Yeah. Totally shocking. And
spoiler alert, you were stymied in your effort to do this.
And it wasn't even really me, because it was Joel, right, and Brendan and Juan. I was just kind of a volunteer person in the background, kind of like pushing, like, let's start working on this. And it was very much in its infancy, right? Because there's a lot of things have to go through a lot of different approval levels for anything like this to happen. But, essentially and these are my takeaways from the comments that are in writing there. I have them if anybody ever wants to see them.
Well, we can publish both the proposal and the comments with your permission, alongside absolutely. This on my website when we put the podcast up.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Okay.
So the responses were, it's hard for me to be politically correct, to be honest. So
that's why you're here, Julie. Yeah, that's why you're here.
I felt very strongly that there is this incredible lack of understanding of what our coaches and our club owners need in order to be successful. And it's completely disregarded. I don't want to say, this is a huge generalization, but some of the officials that are in charge at a national level and those in charge of rules and regs I don't see them focused, at least in this case. They showed me that they don't care. And I was shocked. There was a very strong words that showed where their minds were. And they were worried about their own little village, not the athletes, not the coaches. And And by the way, I'll preface, I should have said this in my introduction. I'm here for the athletes and the coaches.
Yeah.
I love the officials. The officials are amazing. We need them. They're volunteers. We have hundreds and thousands of great officials.
Yep.
I want to preface everything I say with that. I do think we have some bad apples within USA Swimming, and unfortunately they have power.
Yeah.
And I think it's holding back the sport. And that was why I called you, because I think it's very, very serious.
You thought, hey, let's get the guy who's always throwing rocks at USA Swimming. Maybe he can help with this.
Yeah.
I want to get to JB here in a second, but I just want to echo a few of the points you made, because I told people, like, I do think this is a really relevant conversation to be having in the context of we're a few days away from the Olympics. Traditionally, in swimming, there is a increase in interest in swimming around an Olympic Games. So it is a very important moment business-wise for swim clubs. And I saw this in person. We haven't even had the Olympics yet, but I pulled into the pool here at Wahoo's last night, and for the first time, I couldn't find a place to park. I had to park my car over on the grass, and there was just a mass of people who were here to try their kids out for the swim team, which is great news for us, because we've been our normal capacity, and I'm sure there are many, many, many swim clubs that are like this. Our normal capacity, about 300 people. We've been at about 215 through COVID. So we want to get back up to a higher number, obviously, because we have the capacity for it, but also just for the sake of the business. It helps to be running at that capacity. And, like a lot of the kids that I tried out for swimming last night just simply haven't been in a pool for over a year. I think one of the things inside the competitive swimming bubble, which, you see yourself somewhat outside of, and actually getting a benefit of being on the outside of, because it leads you to ask questions inside the swimming bubble. One of the questions I've always been wondering about this whole time is this big reduction in numbers we've seen, is this permanent? Is this the new reality? Or are we going to be able to bring people back in? And I think the answer is yes, but they're not necessarily going to come for a lot of the issues that you bring up. The second thing that I think you bring up here that's really important, and I know John's really passionate about this as well, is somehow we've created a sport here in the United States, and it's not like this everywhere, although many places it is. I mean, I have Paul, my boss, on the podcast a lot, and we talk about how few people are making a living off of swimming, but somehow we've created a sport that draws membership from affluent areas of the United States, is perceived by a lot of those people as a high cost sport. And yet on the other end of it, we have coaches that are suffering really poor health outcomes, that are in many cases underpaid. And how we built, a business model around that makes people at both ends feel like they're getting squeezed is something for sure worth addressing. So JB, Julie said, you were transitioning, you weren't maybe directly involved with this proposal, but I know from ever since I've heard of you, improving meets and having a meet that's fun has been something actually you've been really passionate about. So speak a little bit, and you can riff off anything I just said as well. Speak a little bit about what parts of this really resonated with you.
Well, as a recovering hoarder, in my own personal life, where I had this bad habit of collecting things, you start to realize that you got to simplify, and simpler is better, in my opinion. And I think that when we can simplify things and make access easy, everything gets easier. Your messaging gets easier, your recruitment of volunteers gets easier, your ability to engage people gets easier, everything gets easier. And what I think we're doing, and when I say this, I know a lot of the people involved in this, everyone has the best of intentions. I don't think anybody is saying my way is always the right way. I think it's just people are applying solutions to these problems out of their own experience. And maybe that's not necessarily what the moment's calling for. You know, maybe it's something different. I was laughing when you were talking about the bump, the idea of the bump. That didn't happen in the last cycle. I don't know how many people know that. That bump, there was a bump, but the first time ever, the bump was from people who had been USA Swimming members previously. It wasn't all new people. And in fact, those returning members outstripped the new members in USA Swimming. I think that's a published stat. And unless I'm wrong about that, but I was told that repeatedly by a couple of different people. Yeah, we have a youth problem. We have an engagement in sports problem right now, but that's in all of sports. Can I share my screen? Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. Here, let me see if I can give you permission to.
Yeah, and because I want to show you something that I think kind of gets to what we need to be doing, and I think this is a huge part of that. What Julie's talking about, and I think that as we talk about how do we make this better, I think we got to compartmentalize these pieces a little bit and say, okay, we've got new customers, we've got existing customers, and we've lost customers. So how do we help those three pieces? So I'll just pop this up here.
Yeah, and by the way, just to speak to what you're saying, that every single person I tried out last night, I did, a very sort of brief survey on what their history in swimming was, and we had all three categories that you're just speaking of. We had people that were involved in year-round swimming that were looking to get back to it. We had people that were recreational swimmers who are now looking to get sort of more involved in swimming, and we just had sort of complete newcomers to the sport writ large. And it's something I think a lot about because I have a daughter who's 7.5 years old. She wasn't really ready to do much competitively at the beginning of the pandemic. She was 6. And now I already start feeling like, is there an entryway to her? Because it almost feels like a little bit like she's locked out from getting involved in competitive swimming. And that sounds crazy to me because she's 7.5 years old. Do you know what I mean? So go ahead and share what you've got. I'm just filling time while you shared your.
Yeah, no. So hopefully you guys can see this.
We can see it.
This is on the NHL. This is the NHL's Let's Get Playing Play Today campaign. And I think that we could learn a lot from this. Obviously, NHL is a pro sport. First off, it's not just the NHL, it's the NHL and the NHL Players Association. So you get a legacy piece there where people are saying, hey, I've been a part of this. We want to contribute to this. We love hockey. We want everybody to play hockey. And as you start scrolling down on this thing, learn, play, grow, share, support, empower. Why hockey? It lays it all out for you. This is what's great about it. And then they do something even better. This is about youth sports. All these good things that happen because kids play youth sports. And hockey could have easily put up a bunch of stats and things that are just hockey related. Right. But instead, they hit it all. And they're just saying, hey, look, we're all in this together. Let's get it done. And by the way, our sport is safe. We use high-tech equipment. It's got to be properly fitted. These are the things we do. It's all here. Everything is here. Why is it that the USOPC or USA Swimming isn't doing this? Where is the USA Swimming piece on this? And this is where I think we start to get this blend of things that create backlog and logjam with what we're talking about with Julie's proposal. We don't have to treat everything like the Olympics. In fact, we shouldn't, because I mean, that would be like trying to teach a kid math and start with differential equations or something. It doesn't make sense. Right. You want to start at something that's age appropriate. So how do we do that? And I don't know if this is the right solution or the wrong solution, but pushing it back on the LSCs and saying, well, each LSC can decide. Half of the LSCs don't know what they're doing. They have no guidance. They have boards that are constantly turning over. They're completely volunteer based. They need help.
Right.
And if you look at what we just went through with COVID, half of them don't have any money. So how are we going to do this? And how are we going to build this out? And that's what I think we need to be looking at, as a more holistic solution about how are we going to get more people involved in our sport? How do we do it?
And that was one thing. I don't mean to interrupt you, buddy. That was one thing that we talked about when we were putting this together, was that, you know, and I kept kind of hammering this with Joel and those guys, that we are looking to them for solutions to problems. And if they don't come up with solutions, then there's a vacuum that's created and all sorts of things happen. Some are good, some are not good. And I feel very strongly that staff agrees with that. And I have heard, and now I have actually seen, that the functionality of USA Swimming is, you know, well, the way it's set up, and in some ways, at least right now, is prohibiting progress. And JB, you didn't really touch on that, and maybe you don't really want to, but I think that when I say you, I don't think there's another sports organization that's set up like ours is. And when I say that, when you look at the stakeholders that are involved, and again, and I'll also preface this by saying I am a youth basketball official, and I have been for over 30 years. So I know what officiating is. It's not exactly the same as swim, but I understand it because it's management of an event is essentially what officiating is, right? So I get it. I appreciate it. They're absolutely an incredibly necessary and valued part of sports in general. However, when there are technical decisions that need to be made about a sport, like swimming, for instance, where the staff or coaches and club owners within the organization are saying, look, we need this. We're at the grassroots level. We need help. We need to change how we're doing things. This isn't working. I just literally don't understand why it's so difficult to progress. And because we're set up the way that we are, with committees and with the board of directors, staff just can't, you know, snap their fingers and say, oh, we're going to just do this now. That doesn't happen. It has to go through a series of different, again, stakeholders. I hate using that word, but it's prohibiting us from moving forward. So JB, I love your hockey description there. I love how, you know, I think that's exactly incredibly relevant for USA Swimming to, I mean, what would have to happen for USA Swimming to actually be able to enact something like that? It's not as simple as just going in and like, oh, we're going to change the website and make it look like this now, because you have to set up all of the internal, you know, all the goods and services and the products and everything that we would need to offer to our customers as a team, as an organization, in order to even, I mean, we're like literally at square one on that.
Well, I think you have to figure out the why of what it is you're trying to do. And I think it seems obvious that we should be recruiting. We should be recruiting young people to be in the sport.
Yep.
And there's going to be a lot of different opinions about why we should be doing that. You know, there's the financial viability of the sport. There's the exposure piece. There's the reloading for the Olympics, all these things. You know, USA Swimming is part of the USOPC. It's guided by its mission and vision, and it has its own mission and vision and values, right? So what are we trying to do? And I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think these things can exist together. I mean, nothing is mutually exclusive here. But what I think has to happen is you have to break it apart a little bit and say, look, this isn't this. These are two very different things we're talking about here. And why couldn't we put together just a little gateway deal for kids to get involved? You know, how do we get to the point where, you know, they can get something out of it? You know, I look at high school swimming, and as somebody who has struggled for a long time with where high school swimming fits into the broader piece of competitive swimming, I think I was wrong for a long time, because I looked at it and I thought to myself, oh man, these kids could be getting so much better if they just swam with a club team for 24 weeks instead of 14 weeks. You know what? Maybe they don't want to. And maybe they're perfectly happy with the level of engagement they have.
Right.
So how do we bring those kids under the big tent? How do we bring those people together and create this kind of swimming nation that we want to have with 1 million members, you know, or, you know, a million swimmer march or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I look at what USA Swimming's doing with this supporters club idea, which I think is a great idea. It's part of their foundation. It's a low cost way to get involved in supporting USA Swimming. But I feel badly for them, because I think they've been stymied a little bit with how much they can push that out to membership, how much they can get people engaged in it. And I think but I love the idea. I love the idea.
Did you sign up for it?
No, because I.
Okay. I signed.
I'm making a
for
face,
it.
so I am glad Julie asked that question.
I signed up for it because I wanted to see what happens, and I signed up for it, and nothing has happened. I have not gotten an email. I have not gotten, and again, I'm not pointing the fingers at anybody. To me, yes, it's a great idea, but it's like checking a box, you know, like, oh, we have this supporters club, we have this. It doesn't make sense to me in the broader business plan here. And, you know, I don't mean to be so alarmist about all this, but this is what I see where I sit. I see we're like teetering on the edge of either we're going to take some steps and become more accessible, become easier to participate in, or we're not.
Yeah.
And if we're not, then we're never going to grow. We're going to shrink, because there's a lot more other things that people can do. And I don't know whether you guys have noticed, but parents these days, especially a parent of a 12 and under, like Chris, you could probably, you know, say yes or no to this, but in most cases, there's not as much patience when it comes to the time putting into things. There's a lot going on. I mean, 10 years ago, I looked at a swim meet and I'm thinking, I couldn't sit still. Like
Right.
I became, you know, a stroke turn official, because it's like, I have to sit here under this 10 hours for 3 days. Like, I mean, and I know I've pissed a lot of people off having this conversation, because this is what USA Swimming is. This is what USA Swimming does. But as a result, because we don't have just, I mean, another line of competition type products, we're alienating a ton of kids and well, families, I should say. It's not really kids, because families are making a choice. It's like, oh, do I want to join the soccer and have, you know, a couple games a week, and I just show up at the park and they kick the ball around for an hour. I get to be on the sidelines and hang out, and, you know, maybe my cup's filled with who knows what, sitting in the chair with my buddies. Or am I going to go to I mean, I was at a swim meet a month ago in Angleton, Texas, at this beautiful new facility that's in the middle, you know, it's almost near Galveston. The heat index was 110. You know, that's where the pool is. And you know, there were 600 swimmers in the meet, and everybody got it done. But I mean, people were passing out. You know, it's like, we just I don't know what we're doing sometimes.
Yeah.
And having that conversation with staff, coming up with at least the infancy of an idea of a solution, and then seeing it get absolutely smothered and shot down. I'm like, I was actually just rethinking, even in my position within golf, it's like, I don't even know if I can like affect any sort of positive evolution here. I just felt handcuffed, and I felt really bummed out about it, to be honest. And JB, I know, you know, he's friends with a lot of these people, and I'm just going to call it out. And you know, I'm not going to force him to to say anything that he doesn't want to say, but we have a problem in USA Swimming, and it's that we have officials who are overstepping their responsibilities.
Well,
And
I think we have a good spectrum actually here for a conversation, because JB, in our conversations, I would say, I mean, I've staked pretty strong territory as somebody who's fairly cynical about USA Swimming. I think that Julie is staking something in the middle of the two of us, and I would say you, if I could characterize you correctly, are a little bit more hopeful about what kind of change can be affected from the inside. I mean, like when I look at the supporters club, and I know I'm going to make a bunch of points that you guys are going to want to respond to, but I actually want to hear about the specific proposal, because we've gotten well into this without sort of just laying it out for people. But I'll make some of these points will lead into it. Just having read what you guys do, I think the supporters thing, I mean, from my cynical eyes, it just seemed like a cash grab to me. It's just much like the cardboard cutouts at the Olympic trials. It just seemed like they were hurting for money and they wanted more money. But I will say, you know, like I coach a group here, and JB, you and I haven't talked about this. I talked about this with Julie. I coach a group here on Wahoo's where we may have upwards of 60 kids in my group the next year, which if you go back to the earlier part of the conversation, it's going to be 20% of our team. These are kids who play other sports and are involved in swimming, or want to do high school swimming and show up to more of the sort of practices and activities with high school swimming and be here. And so we're having in the real world, like a lot of interest in that. And a lot of these kids didn't come to meets prior to the pandemic. But in the pandemic, we were forced to host internal meets, maybe one other team or just us. So we had very short sessions, and I was able to get a lot of these kids to start showing up to meets, because it was come on Saturday for 2 hours, maybe come on Sunday for 2 hours. That's your swim meet experience for the weekend. It was definitely a struggle to do more than that. As we got to sort of a more normal sense, you know, the sessions got longer, trials and finals and all this stuff. We definitely struggled with some of this. And I also think back to when I was coaching in Denmark, Shannon Rawlson had a big influence on me. He was the national training center coach at the time. And he had a son that was about my daughter's age now, back then, who's getting involved in the sport of swimming. And here's a guy who's so passionate about the sport of swimming. He's going to the Olympics as a coach, and wants his kids to be involved in swimming. And it drove him crazy that at the developmental level, he couldn't get his kid to a swim meet that was a couple hours long, where he knew when it was going to start and he knew where it was going to end. All right. So to back up, I don't know which one of you want to take this, but like, let's just lay out at least a few of the structure, pieces of the structure of what this league would entail. And then I want to get into a little bit of the feedback. And then if we have time, we can get into all these other branching conversations about whether USA Swimming is doing what they're supposed to, or, you know, should be reformed or restarted or whatever. Let's just hear, like, what does the swim meet look like that you proposed?
You want to take it, JB, or you want me to?
Why don't you take that, and then I can.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, essentially, and I mean, we didn't carve out every single detail.
That's great, but
it was focused.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's focused more on short session. So it's a 2-hour swim meet. There's specific events, you know, geared to 12 and under. So there's no, you know, there may be one distance, like depending if it's long course or it's actually more focused on short course. You only need 3 officials to run the meet, and one of them is the administrative official. So, you know, you have a starter, and then you have somebody who's essentially there to stroke turn. There's
so
also
a starter, somebody walking up and down the pool, and like head referee at the meet.
Yeah, well, a starter can't always, I mean, a starter can, depending on how long the microphone cord is and everything. I mean, it's like a high school swim meet. Yeah. I mean, I've been to high school swim meets where only one official is there. So It's essentially the guts of what a high school swim meet looks like. There's also a piece to this where there's an encouragement to get kids involved, swimmers involved in officiating, which is this whole other cool piece. We do this in basketball. And, we recognize kids that are, have an interest in competency and, being able to evaluate an event like that. And, sure enough, they love it. And they get to, be in the case of swimming, it would be, they, would get to be a stroke turn. They would get to, maybe even be a starter. I think sometimes we, I don't, there's only certain people that are allowed to do these things. And I don't know why that is. But the purpose of and I'm probably doing a terrible job of explaining this.
I coach a kid, shout out to Mackenzie, who's a youth soccer official. She's 15, 16 years old.
And she's probably fantastic.
I want her to babysit my kids. But,
we talk about swimmers and youth sports participants as these kids that are, they're capable of doing these things. Like we literally have kids within our sport that become, that's why they are attracted to swimming, or they're attracted to sports in general. They want to do things, they want to learn. They're a vessel to just pour in whatever awesome opportunities we want to. And I think I don't even know how to, I'm so.
All right, don't get lost, Julie. Keep going with the proposal.
Yeah. So, okay. There's a squirrel over there and I just saw it. So essentially it's, it's short format. It's only to happen. It's duels, but it can be, I think there was a maximum number. It's like 250 swimmers that it could be in order to keep it moving.
Yeah.
It was designed so that the LSC could take it and kind of make it their own. So, we could make it like, I looked at it like this, we have the north part of our LSC, we have the south part, and we could like do a north versus south and have standings and have, those teams played each other or swam against each other. They've got this many points. They're in they have standings. And then we have a championship get together at the end of the year. Some of this conversation was inspired by ISL, which even though it's incredibly complicated, the swimmers love it because all they want to do is race. They don't care what their times are.
Right. And
it's the whole idea of this is focused on team, not focused on an individual's time, but the kid is they're going to get a time, but what's more important is you just raced, you got third place, you got, 2 points for your team, or you just raced on a relay, you got points for your team. So everybody is participating and getting a chance to actually be a part of it and not sitting there worried that they're, just gotta, they're swimming slow and they didn't get a best time. And so the focus is on team. I know I'm not doing a very good job of completely, vetting this out, but the point of it is, and you are going to post that on wherever you post things, which I really do. I really do encourage everybody to read it. Joel Schinnefeld is the one who wrote it, based on everybody's who participated, their recommendations. But it's literally just the guts of the whole point of this. We need a easier, simpler way to run a competition, focused more on the team and not so much on individual performance.
Yeah.
And hope to start a paradigm shift where we don't have a bunch of parents of 10 and unders and 12 and unders who are like, oh, honey, good job. You just dropped 5 seconds. And, the next meet, oh, you dropped another 6 seconds. And then when the kid turns 12, the kid runs to the parent or whatever. And it's like, what's happening? And then the kid runs or the parent runs to the coach and is like, why isn't my kid dropping time? And we just have this, this engine.
And then the coach is like tearing their hair out of their head.
It's just like, we do this to ourselves because we've set up success as, how fast are you going? And I know that is obviously a part of the sport. It's part of this. It's the sport.
Sure.
But we can set up different products and services that actually are in the long run going to help our coaches, because there's going to be less of a focus on times and more of a focus on process. And process is what the sport is all about.
Yeah. And what I said to you on the phone when we were talking about this for over an hour on one of my last drives down to Southern New Jersey before I moved. And is I think there's two things here. Um, One is, and JB, you probably recognize his name. Milton Elms is sort of a background producer for this podcast. I call him sometimes on the phone. I try to get him to talk to me about swimming technique. Most of the time, he ends up giving me life advice and more sort of philosophical advice. I would say one of the things that he has said to me that has stuck with me, and I heard it when you talked about how you reconsidered high school swimming, is he said, Chris, the kid who takes fifth place in his high school dual meet and scores 1 point for the team has a more meaningful swimming experience than a kid who takes 38th at sectionals, right? Even though the kid who takes 38th at sectionals is a much faster swimmer, the meaning of the experience, what they derive from the experience, is more significant when you show up and take fifth. And I think that's what we're getting at here, is creating meaningful experiences. The thing that I was reminded of as I said that, Julie, is like, yeah, of course our sport is about times. We record times. That's how we figure out who, takes first, who takes second, all that stuff. The thing is, people will always focus on times no matter how you design stuff. But we all know that an overriding focus on just times is not a good process for the sport of swimming. So the thing I like about this is we have to intentionally design things to not be focused just on times, right? If we just have a tags, for instance, with a cutoff time, right? And sure, yes, there are some other components to it, but we're missing out on intentionally creating an experience that's focused on some other processes. JB,
Right.
you've been sitting on the sidelines. What would you like to add to that stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting being considered the homer for USA Swimming. That's a new one for me.
It's only in this context. Only in this context.
No, I think that maybe the solution here, because I'd like to talk about solution.
Yes, let's get to that an hour in. Let's do it.
Yeah, instead of getting after people. I think that if you could create a package of products and say to the LSCs, here's what you can do. Here's how you market swimming to kids in your area. And these are the meets you run. They're simple, they're easy, they're fulfilling, and we've got some ideas on maybe, a couple of different levels that you can do it at. You could create an easy to follow structure where everybody understands what it is. Part of what's great about high school swimming is it is the same in every state. It's 11 events, 8 individual events, 3 relays. You either go 3-1 or 2-2. That's it. Those are your choices. And it's incredibly relevant because people can compare it and contrast it and whatever. If you had some simple formats that you could do and go to the LSCs and say, hey, here's what you do, here's how you run it. I mean, you're not trying to create this, again, micromanaged meet. And right now, as we're coming out of COVID, I would argue that a little certainty would be nice for a lot of people, because I see meets changing after they've been sanctioned by people, and everybody's saying, well, that's just the way it is. So on the one hand, we're saying that this developmental league, oh no, we got to do it this way. But then at the top level, like your futures meet, right. Well, you can't go to your futures meet because it's full, and we don't really have another option. So I guess we're going to have to change it midstream. That's what I'm talking about. And I think that's where Julie's getting frustrated, is that maybe they're not trying to be hypocritical, but it comes off as a serious hypocrisy about things. Why does everything have to be treated the same way? And again, you've got to consider your customer, you got to consider your end goal, and you got to consider what you're doing. If you create this developmental league and your goal is, well, we want to make the next Michael Phelps, on the surface, I would say you are insane, because this isn't what this is.
Right.
But the long-term piece of it, you might find 10 to 20 athletes nationally who start in this thing who end up being trials qualifiers when it's all said and done.
Right.
You don't have to do everything in the first step, but we do have a goal in the end. And I think that there's a place where everybody can meet on this, but you've got to take those first steps of saying, hey, this is one product, this is another product. How do we make this work? Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you just get like on an individual club sense of this, that the some of the advantages of that, and some of the advantages, for instance, like the group that I coach is very good business wise because we've created a product that people are very interested in, but it doesn't seem as expensive on their end. Because when I talk about what the expense of swimming is, and I've always said this as a parent, it's not just, and I think Julie encapsulated this really well, it's not just how many dollars you pay in, right? Time is money. So if you're at a swim meet for 8 hours on the weekend, that's very expensive for you to participate in the sport. It is. It's costly to families. And so, you know, we've created an opportunity where I hope I'm representing correctly that families don't feel it's so expensive on their end, and it's really good for us business wise on the other end. So this would be really good for clubs, I think, business wise, to have this type of swim meet, have an opportunity for swimmers who might participate in this format of a swim meet. It would be more broad and inclusive, I think, in many ways. I agree with you that it would be very, very helpful for it to come from the top down, because having, for instance, swim meets are, I hate to break it to you, I mean, I brag about many other things in the country of Denmark. Swim meets are even worse in Denmark. Like, I went over there and we had one session. We would go to swim meets, there'd be one session, all age groups, all day, you know? So I'd have had all the kids that were participating in a meet on the pool deck for 10, 11 hours straight in one day.
Wow.
And I tried to make our own swim meets, like divided by age group, lots of resistance to that. You know, I said, okay, but then maybe now only the 13 and up kids will only be here for 3 hours, and then they can go home, and we'll bring in the 12 and unders and they'll be here for, 3 hours. And then maybe we'll have a final session, or maybe we won't, and that was met with a lot of similar resistance to what I see in the feedback section of what you sent to me. But the problem was I tried to, for instance, like start dual meets. Well, it was hard. It was hard to just like set up a meet format like this between you and one other club. Logistically, it's very, very hard. So the more, as you say, put it, like the more this structure can come down so that people just sort of have to slot in. It's simple for them to slot in what they're doing to it. I think it would be immensely, immensely helpful.
Well, I think we've learned, sorry, JB, this is quick, that our clubs have gotten incredibly flexible and able to be creative during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so I had teams run swim meets during practice.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be that you go rent a pool and there's creative ways to do this.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, JB.
I think that what proposals like this do is hopefully they inspire some creativity on the parts of the different teams and our different members. I mean, I think sometimes we struggle in swimming with a lack of imagination. Mm-hmm. There's only so much you can do with what we have. I mean, it's a fairly defined product. So you have to kind of look at, okay, what are some of the different ways we can engage people? And one of the things that we did that we're doing in the fall, I already have my meet schedule done for the fall and winter. Yep. And what we did is we got together, our organization got together with 3 other clubs that are in our geographic area. And we planned out, we're doing a novice meet in the morning where the kids can come, and it's just for little kids. And it's going to be the kind of formats that Julie's talking about proposing. And then in the afternoon, we're going to do a senior quad. and it's going to be high school format for 2 meets, and it's going to be college format for 2 meets. And that way it's not an all-day gig where the kids are all weekend gig where the kids have to be gone. It's short. It'll be fun. We can train in the morning if we want to. It's like we're just saying, it's flexible. And but the thing is the people that I was there with when we were doing this, all of them have probably at least 20 years of swimming coaching experience. And, watching these guys come up with these formats was amazing. I mean, I was sitting back going, go for it. This is awesome. I don't have to think. This is great. Not everybody has access to people like that.
Right.
Or the officials. I mean, between the 4 clubs, we probably have 100 officials.
Wow.
I mean, we can do all of this. All 4 clubs have access to video streaming. We can do, and it's that, prosumer level streaming where you just load it in and it gives you the lanes. It looks like the Olympics 8 years ago, that kind of thing. We all have that. Yeah. So what do you do for clubs that don't have that access? And that's what I think Julie is trying to create, and this group is trying to create, is imagination. And this is what this can be. Go for it, and let's see what comes out of it.
Yeah.
And that's why you don't want to stymie that and say, no, it has to be this bigger, broader thing. To that point, though, and I'll make this quick, as I read those comments on there was one comment that stood out to me, and it said, you can already do a lot of this stuff at the local level. That is absolutely true. The problem is that no one wants to realize that. Yeah. And when you don't have, I think that you need to get this out there so people, even if it doesn't become some kind of codified legislative piece, you say to the LSCs, look, you need to do this. You compel them to do this. And to create something for maybe the people who don't have access to the things that your more fortunate or entitled teams have, and you help them build it out. Yeah. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We're crossing the hour mark. So I think, I want to at least try to put some kind of point on this without starting new branching conversations.
Off the sacred timeline.
Yeah, you got to put on this.
Have you seen Loki?
Speaking of, so I've just watched, I did just watch Loki, now that you bring it up. And concurrently, because I, broadened my TV horizons a little bit, because I was spending a little bit of extra time by myself here when I was traveling back and forth these last few times, I started watching Umbrella Academy on Netflix. So the second season of Umbrella Academy on Netflix, for people who don't know, it's really weird to watch at the same time as Loki, because it's there's a lot of plot similarities in terms of
cool.
time travel and a bureaucratic organization that's managing time travel, and some superheroes that would like to push back against the, but yes. Anyway, back to what we were talking about, not trying to create any branching timelines, too much chaos. Julie, I'm going to give you one more chance. Just put a point on this, final words. And then I will, once you guys speak again, I'll make a point for the sort of the future of this conversation.
Yeah, I just think, continuing to have conversation about products and services that our clubs can offer that are, make it easy to participate, are less expensive, not only to the swimmer, but to the club, that are revenue generating opportunities for our clubs. We can't talk about that enough. And I'll just go back to JB's point. One of the greatest things about USA Swimming is that actually most of the products that we have now, and most of the programming that we have now, is as a result of coaches that come together and club leaders that come together and come up with great ideas.
Yeah.
And we just need to continue to foster that environment, and, hopefully support those that have skin in the game. And the ones that have skin in the game are the club owners, the coaches who make a living and in a lot of cases, not a very good living. And that's another whole topic. I know we don't want to branch off the timeline, but we need to be taking better care of our sport so that our coaches,
Yeah.
have a profession that is actually viable and something that is both, physically and mentally healthy for them. So I know I could go
Yep.
off on all
Yep.
this,
Yep.
but that's my summary.
JB, anything last to add?
I think that one of the things that makes American swimming great is the history and the vibrancy of a lot of the people who have been involved for a long time, whether those are the athletes, the volunteers who we don't hear enough about, dedicated staff, all those people. And I think that one of the things that we really have to realize is that while swimming may exist in a vacuum, the society we engage in does not. And we have to start looking at what's going on and making sure that we are changing, just like the way we talk about kids changing. The thing that killed me in the pandemic was so many people who had talked and said, well, these kids need to be malleable and kids need to be flexible and they need to learn how to do this, are the same people who are like, well, we can't run meets like this. I can't wait for meets to be normal again. Well,
Yeah.
you got to change, you got to be flexible, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we need to find more ways to create opportunities for people who may not be our traditional members, or we need to figure out why our traditional members aren't members anymore and start generating products that are interesting to them, not just rehashing the past for us and what's worked in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you make a good point about American swimming. I think, having been existed both inside of it and outside of it and sort of inside of it, I would say, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is probably more possible here than almost anywhere else in the world. I talked about the resistance, how strong resistance could be outside. I mean, literally, when I was coaching in Denmark, we had the national governing body coming out with recommendations for this. This will drive all the libertarian-minded swim coaches crazy. We had the National Federation coming out with specific recommendations for how much yardage I should do at every practice. I mean, so there can be an even more sort of heavy-handed level of bureaucracy. So this is a great conversation. It was really great to bring you guys on. And one of the things I talked about with Julie, and you can hear in this podcast that there's a lot more, I think, to discuss. So I hope to have you guys back to discuss some of those things. I think there's a conversation to be had about coach well-being. That's an important issue to me because it's another important part of my job here at Wahoo's, and I'm sort of trying to blaze a trail in that sense, because I don't know that there's a lot of places that have put that much intentional investment into something like that. I think there's plenty more to be discussed about the sort of swimmer experience in the sport. So thank you to both of you for coming on and being willing to have this conversation. I think it'd be really valuable to all the people listening. Everybody have a great time watching the Olympics. For people who listen to this, we will on Thursday, I'll be joined by Eric and Joel, and we will do a Olympic preview, swim brief style. And we'll try not to get psyched out by the swim swam preview that's already up, that Eric tells me is actually pretty good. We're going to see if we can do better than that. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks you to Julie and JB for joining me. And I'll see you on Thursday.